Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Breaking news coverage resumes. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Another tense day, another emotional day. The next set of Israeli hostages is heading home soon after being held captive by Hamas for more than 7 weeks since the terror onslaught on the 7th of October. What we can confirm just in is that 2 Israeli Russians, you can see them on your screen right now, 2 women, Irina Tati, age 73, and Yelena Trupanov, aged 50, on your screen right now, have been handed over by those armed Hamas terrorists to Red Cross officials. You can see on your screen those images from just a short while ago. It's the final day of a truce deal, a truce that may again be extended, this time by 4 days. Today's list of 10 hostages includes women and teenage girls and boys. Look at those images on your screen right now. Those are the 2 Israeli Russian women who have been released first, ostensibly as some kind of gesture to President Vladimir Putin. Now, the Bibas family are not on the list of people coming home, and the IDF is looking into what it calls a cruel claim by Hamas that Mother Shiri and her sons, the youngest hostage, 10-month-old Kfir Bibas, and 4-year-old Ariel Bibas, have been killed. We just heard Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, talking about it moments ago in his daily briefing as well, saying the IDF says that Hamas bears responsibility for the safety of all the hostages, even if Hamas did in fact hand the Bibas family to another terror faction. Now, while families wait to receive the freed hostages at this hour, also confirmation from Daniel Hagari moments ago that the number of hostages still in captivity is 159. 159 people remain in captivity at the hands of Hamas terrorists. Now for the latest, let's go back to our correspondent, Zach Anders. He joins us from Sheba Hospital. So, Zach, we know that 12 more hostages are coming home. We saw the 2 Russian-Israeli women. We're waiting for confirmation about the 10 other hostages set to be released momentarily. What is happening there? What kind of preparations are underway at the hospital?
Well, it's a waiting game here as the hospital staff are anticipating, as the director says, 4 additional hostages will arrive to Sheba Medical Center. The rest of the hostages will be split between 2 other hospitals, and there's hospitals in the south that are on standby should the conditions of these freed hostages warrant that they need to be airlifted directly to a closer hospital, potentially in Beersheba, where the staff there and the trauma facilities are prepared to take an incoming freed hostage. Earlier in the day, to your point about Kfir Bibas and his brother and his mother, a high-level source within the Prime Minister's office informed us that they have no indication that they were killed. They are not hearing or seeing anything that would indicate that they were. And he went, this source went a step further to say that they believe that Hamas has the control and ability to know, one, where all of the hostages are within Gaza, and two, they have the operational capabilities to force or to convince any of the other factions to provide those hostages. So he ultimately pins the responsibility on Hamas.
Absolutely devastating to think the games that are being played here with families. Thank you so much, correspondent Zach Anders, updating us from Sheba Hospital. We will be coming back to you, of course, for more updates. Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, former commander in the Special Forces in the IDF, and now joining us in studio. Welcome to our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. So, Owen, I want to start with you because we've been speaking about the games that Hamas is playing, and what could be more cruel than what is unfolding now around the Bibas family, who have become a symbol of what is unfolding right now. Two beautiful young children with beautiful red hair, a 9-month-old baby at the time of the abduction, Fear, Ariel, 4 years old, and a terrified mother. We have seen those images again and again. And while everybody in the nation was hoping that their names would be on a list and that they would come home safely, you get this report out of Hamas about what may have happened, a report that Israel cannot confirm. Talk to us about what is at play here.
Right, cannot yet confirm or deny, Benita. And I think that for all of the cruelty and all of the frustration, we have to overcome it and focus on the most important thing, which is assessing whether this is true or not true, because that determines the course of events over the next few days. The Israeli government has, by all accounts, made it clear to Hamas that before Israel expects Hamas to release, for example, men who are civilians or start to go into other categories, Israel wants to see all women and children be released first. So it has to have an understanding of how many living women and children there are among the hostages in order to do that in this very, very important case, to understand what the fate of the Bibas family is as best as Israel can ascertain it. So I think that has to be the focus at this hour, trying to understand what the facts are as best as the military can do. They and the Prime Minister have said that they will update the family and presumably the public as well with what they know, because it's an important part of the negotiation. Again, I remind everybody that this truce still officially expires tonight, meaning that in principle, exactly, in principle, 3 hours from now or less at midnight local time, the Israeli military in principle could go back to fighting in the Gaza Strip. And so the clock is ticking toward extending this truce. I think there's a wide expectation it will be extended, but it hasn't been extended yet. And in order to extend it and understanding the parameters for extending it, having the facts out there as best we can is very, very important.
The US and Qatar, Doron, are pushing for a larger deal. We spoke about it a little bit earlier, that could hopefully include men and soldiers being returned. But given your experience in this field, looking back, that comes at a very high price. Would Israel be prepared at this juncture to adhere to that price?
It's hard to estimate. It's a real dilemma for the decision makers, because when a deal with the soldiers, we have to see whether it's effective and what does it mean. If this means the ceasing of all campaign or war activities, this would be hard for the Israeli to accept. Also the price in terms of whom to release. So this would be a main dilemma. I think they are orchestrating this dilemma ahead of us. But maybe we'll find the dilemma when we are already in campaign. If there will be a breach in the ceasefire and we are back. As we know, today, the Chief of Staff authorized the plans of the Southern Command, so the army is ready, the plans are ready, and if this deal would come out in some later stage in a fighting, then we'll be in a different positioning to negotiate. So maybe this would be a scenario that would be better for us, and not in the position that we are now.
I do think, though, that at least civilian men, especially older civilian men, I suspect the price won't be as high, and I suspect that could be made almost as an extension of this deal, just a guess. Of course, once you get to the soldiers, right, that's where it starts to become more difficult. I'll just say about younger women, who are also a category, obviously, that's at risk. Hamas reportedly not so inclined to release them, and that's obviously very, very suspicious and very, very upsetting and very, very concerning. concerning. But those are the categories that are next on the table. But it has to be emphasized, once the current categories have been exhausted, and in having an understanding of whether the current categories have been exhausted, the Israeli government needs the best information it can about the fate of those hostages, because once hostages are no longer living, that of course is a very different category, and one would hope that the Israeli government will not treat the living and the dead in the same way, although of course we hope that all hostages are living and can be part of a current deal.
Certainly, continue.
I say from the perspective of Hamas, soldiers, it means prisoners of war. Prisoners of war, for them, it's their soldiers against their soldiers, their terrorist soldiers against whatever, against us. So this is a real, and this would be a real dilemma. But maybe we'll be, I say, in the midst of fighting, and this will change the equation and how we handle it.
Certainly, as you say, very difficult decisions for leaders to be making. Talking of which, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterating earlier that Israel will still achieve its goals in this war. Let's take a listen to what he meant.
From the beginning of the war, I set 3 goals: the elimination of Hamas, the return of all our abductees, and to ensure that Gaza will never again be a threat to Israel. These 3 goals remain in place. In the last week, we achieved a very great achievement: the return of many dozens of our abductees. A week ago, it would have sounded imaginary, but we have achieved it. But in the last few days, I hear a question. After this phase of returning our abductees is exhausted, will Israel return to fighting? So my answer is an unequivocal yes.
So, Doron Avital, how is Benjamin Netanyahu doing in terms of achieving those 3 goals he just outlined in your estimation?
The question is how the state of Israel, I wouldn't say Netanyahu in person. I mean, the state is recruited to this mission. So we declared 2 missions, simultaneously followed. Breaking up Hamas, breaking his military control in the Gaza, and releasing the hostages. Lately, the releasing of the hostages comes up front, giving those exchanges. This is why we seized the fighting. In terms of the day after, this would have to be worked out with our allies. I mean, the U.S. for sure. Blinken tomorrow comes and sits in the war cabinet, which is this is a new thing for Israelis to see.
Highly unusual.
Yeah, really, we could not have envisioned it before. So the day after, Hamas not in Gaza, hopefully, I'm not sure how would it be achieved, but this is a long task. But then we'll have to work out with our allies and with Egypt, and of course, and I think, though Bibi might not agree, the PA would be a player that Hamas would try, that the US will try to push forward, a stronger PA to be a player. I'm not sure it's coming next, not next year, but in the long run, this is the only representative the US considers representative of the Palestinian case, and I don't think the US would give any concession to Bibi about the future in terms of moving forward with the Palestinian case, not the Hamas case. Hamas eliminated, maybe Biden initiative comes up, and maybe a new Middle East is emerging. This is one venue. The other venue is extended regional conflict. Hezbollah enters, and then we're in a different story.
Well, I mean, 2 comments. First of all, I agree with you, Doron, that the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government have different opinions, possibly, on what Palestinian governance in Gaza looks like. That said, don't forget Joe Biden's op-ed in the Washington Post with that word revitalized that got so much attention, right? A revitalized Palestinian Authority.
Of course.
That adjective was there on purpose, and it was meant to get attention, and it did. Unfortunately, to the exclusion of the rest of the op-ed, but that's another story. Also, don't underestimate the extent to which Netanyahu's argument about the new conditions for PA governance are being accepted even beyond the obvious circles. Take an obvious example. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times over the last day or 2 writing a column that ostensibly is against Netanyahu and ostensibly takes a different line in Palestinian governance in the Gaza Strip. But Thomas Friedman in that very column talks about the need to change the education system, talks about the need to get rid of incitement. Where is that coming from? Netanyahu's speeches. It's on the table internationally. It's part of the international agenda. It's a central item in the day after because Netanyahu has convincingly has convincingly placed it there. And that condition is going to be there again. How is it going to be achieved? How deeply is it going to be achieved? How is it going to be monitored? Huge questions. But again, we've seen the German government, for example, cut funding to UNRWA in the Gaza Strip. They're a major funder of the Palestinian education system and of UNRWA. So again, this issue is on the international agenda, and it's there because Netanyahu put it there, and it's there because Netanyahu put it there convincingly.
I would say that the day after, we all the time talk about the day after in Gaza, in the Middle East, but there's also the day after in Israeli politics.
Absolutely.
And the day after in Israeli politics would be dramatic. I'm not sure who would in the end would prevail, but it's going to be a story, because an event in this magnitude cannot not have far-reaching political consequences within the Israeli society and Israeli political class. We'll have to see what's up.
I'm a contrarian, and I'm actually not sure about that, but we'll discussion for another day.
It certainly will give us discussion for another day. But for today, President Joe Biden, as we've been discussing, taking to social media earlier. Let's take a listen to his comments, given what you're talking about with this revitalized Palestinian Authority down the line. He says Hamas unleashed a terrorist attack because they fear nothing more than Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace. To continue down the path of terror, violence, killing and war is to give Hamas what they seek. We can't do that. Your thoughts?
Look, the White House in part walked back this tweet, right, saying that Joe Biden is not pushing for a permanent ceasefire or the end of the war. But what's obviously behind this, right? On one hand, political blowback he's facing from within the Democratic Party and some constituencies that I think he feels politically, and I think he probably feels to some extent on the merits. I mean, there is a lot of human suffering in Gaza that touches Palestinian Americans, redounds on Biden, and he feels he has to address that in a way that establishes in his mind and in their mind more balance in American policy. On the other hand, the truly important parts of that Biden op-ed we talked about a few moments ago are still very much, I suspect, in Joe Biden's mind. The connection between Israel and Ukraine, the U.S. alliance system around the world, the containment of Russia and China, the contest with China, the contest with Russia. These are what Joe Biden sees as the foreign policy mission and doctrine of his administration. Israel, in his mind, is part of that. Defeating Hamas is part of that. Shaping the day after in Gaza, for that matter, also part of that. A normalization with Saudi Arabia on the day after, for that matter, also part of that. So again, Joe Biden has to balance what he sees as the political housekeeping, if you will, within the Democratic Party, and also the bigger geopolitical issues, which I suspect haven't changed for him much since October 7th. One final word about the politics. A lot has been overstated on this, as I've said so many times in our broadcast. In practice, there's no clear and present danger to Joe Biden politically from this war. The election is a year away. The news cycle will spin quickly and repeatedly and on many, many more days after that, long after this is well in the rearview mirror. And also, again, it is going to be a contest between him and presumably Donald Trump. That will focus many, many minds in the United States. Yes, there are scenarios where Arab American voters in Michigan decide the elections, but those are not the most likely scenarios. This is not a clear and present danger to Biden, but I do suspect he wants to keep the peace within his party at a general level, and that is something that incentivizes a tweet like that.
Let's discuss more about what happens down the line in a short while. Right now, let's find out what is happening on the ground at this moment. We go live back to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran, and I understand that at that junction where you are right now, the convoy has come past just moments ago with two people on the screen. You can see the Russian Israelis who have been set free by Hamas, Irina Tati, Yelena Trupanov, coming past in that convoy at the Urim junction. What is the latest there, Ariel? What can you tell us?
Right, Benita, the latest is that just no more than 10 minutes ago, we could see the convoy carrying Yelena and Irina. Some of us waved to them, and they passed by on their way to Hatzerim Air Base. This is just a less than 20-minute drive from here, Urim Junction in southern Israel. In Hatzerim Air Base, they'll be medically evaluated. After that, they will make their way to the hospitals in Israel. Now, I won't take such a a gamble to guess that they will probably make their way to the hospitals only once this next convoy of hostages arrives, that we still have no official word regarding the release of the other 10 Israeli hostages, 5 women and 5 minors, that are expected to be handed over to the Red Cross any moment by Hamas. Still no word from there. After they are handed over to the Red Cross, the IDF will issue a statement, and usually the time frame is about an hour and a half once the initial statement comes out from the IDF that they have been handed over to Red Cross hands. Then they make their way here, passing us on their way to Hatzerim Air Base. Now, in these past few minutes, in addition to this convoy passing here, causing a lot of excitement here in the area, Hamas also released a video, their nightly video, of pretty much the best way you can describe it is a circus show every night that they put on to the cameras, showing the release of Israeli hostages. These past few nights, they've been more surrounded by crowds of Gazans, trying to show not only that they are in control of the Gaza Strip, but also that they have support of the people. This is something that is very important to them, and they're highlighting this in their videos. Obviously, this is their regular propaganda, but indeed, it's also unfortunate that in the last moments of these hostages in captivity, they have to succumb to such jeers and cheers from the crowd residents of Gaza as they're handed to safe hands in the Red Cross on their way to Israel. As we said earlier, convoy of 2 Israeli hostages has already passed by here a few minutes ago, still waiting in anticipation for the word of the release of the other 10 hostages, expected to be handed over to the Red Cross sometime this evening.
Certainly that footage of those 2 women being escorted by those armed terrorists in masks to the Red Cross, very disturbing, not to mention, as you say, the jeering, people taking pictures, shouting like that. Over and above the trauma of captivity for 7 weeks, that's what they had to endure. We'll be coming back to you for the latest developments on the ground. Thank you so much for now. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. And talking about the responses from across the world, French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu has been speaking to our Matthias Inbar from our sister French channel. Let's take a listen to what they discussed.
Do you agree with President Biden, who ultimately says that there will be no other choice than to return to fighting and eradicate Hamas?
Hamas is an armed terror group with a military wing. It must be eradicated. No Israeli ally disputes this, even if you have seen it here or there in France, with political parties like France Insoumise. But all this is very residual. No one disputes Israel's right to defend itself, and no one can see, after what happened on October 7th, the security challenge. Only that we can say that Hamas carries and obviously weighs on the security of Israelis and the State of Israel, but also the rest of the region, because we can also see very well that we have jihadism too. It is connecting through social networks, through financial circuits, and I unfortunately make the link with what is happening once again in the Levant and in the Sahel. We can obviously not disconnect from this. Once again, the question is how to get there. That is the question. That is the question that concerns us, and which I obviously regularly discuss with my counterpart, Yoav Gallant. The border between Lebanon and Israel may not be the subject of interest among the major chancelleries and in all European or Western capitals, but there may be an exception. It is precisely Paris, because we see well that it is an absolute priority for the security of Israel and also for the stability of the entire Middle East.
How do we change words to actions? Because time is running out, and we are at the brink of a conflict that won't just be regional.
Obviously, behind Hezbollah is Tehran, and obviously the security challenges it poses are absolutely terrifying. And so I think that if Israel has the right to defend itself, I will once again refer to the attack as it was, as we know it, the terrifying attack of October 7th. It is clear that control of the escalation is also part of the major global parameters which contribute to the security of the State of Israel, and therefore to the security of the entire region. Therefore, beyond the security of the world, I think that for now it is our responsibility responsibility as political leaders to hold words and actions that are efficient, to not play the policy of the worst.
French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu speaking to our Matthias Inbar from our sister French channel. Owen, your thoughts, your takeaways?
Well, he made the best case he could, right, going on I-24 News French channel about French policy towards this part of the world, right, playing up the French influence in Lebanon and interest in Lebanon for what it's worth and usefulness of French interest and influence in Lebanon for what it's worth. As for the war in the Gaza Strip, he said that Hamas need to be eliminated, but he certainly danced around the question of the ceasefire, and we all know why. We all know what the French government's position is on this. He didn't really get to the answer of exactly how you eliminate Hamas, which he called for, without actually fighting Hamas. Is there some kind of diplomatic solution for eliminating Hamas? If so, I think there are 10 million Israelis who would love to see it. Hamas is not about to stand down, not diplomatically. It seems that there is a trade-off between eliminating Hamas, a need in order to eliminate Hamas to fight it, and a trade-off between laying down arms and accepting Hamas or fighting Hamas and eliminating it. By the way, you see the same kind of logic potentially creeping into the Biden administration policy as well. What did Antony Blinken say earlier in the day at a meeting, a NATO meeting? Of course, he's coming here tomorrow, so we'll be asked about this. He said the objective has to be to ensure that October 7th never happens again. And then talking about the need to help to do more to spare civilians and get aid into the Strip. Of course, those are not new in terms of American goals, but didn't put out there the idea of Hamas being eliminated. Did allude to his previous comments about the day after in Gaza, which talked, of course, presumes that the day is the day after in Gaza without Hamas running the Strip, but did not actually come back to that central Israeli goal from that very, very first meeting of the Security Cabinet of eliminating Hamas's military capabilities. So if you want to prevent October 7th, does that necessarily mean eliminating Hamas's military capabilities, or are there two different things and the Biden administration trying to lead Israel towards some other solution? And if so, we have to really see what it is. And there's obviously going to be a lot of skepticism.
We're going to talk about that in a moment, but I want to check back in with our correspondent, Nicole Zedek. She's at a hotel in the Dead Sea. Everybody waiting for confirmation about the next set of hostages. What can you tell us there?
It's an anxious waiting game, unfortunately, Benita, but I can tell you we are hearing from family members here at Kibbutz Be'eri, family members of Amit Shani, 16 years old. They say that they believe that he is going to be on the list. He's one of those 10 Israeli hostages that will be returning home tonight. And so that adds to the anticipation that much more because, as I said, they claim that they believe he will be coming home. And so after 54 days in Hamas captivity, they're expecting to welcome him home, and possibly some others from Kibbutz Be'eri as well. And so all of these people behind me, their eyes are glued to the screen, watching all of the alerts just as we are, just waiting to see exactly when their loved ones might be handed over to the Red Cross, and then finally come back here to Israeli territory after nearly 8 weeks, nearly 2 months in Hamas captivity. It is quite an anxious waiting game. The emotions are very, very high. However, the community is standing strong, and I do want to note on that because we see so much community strength from the people of Be'eri right now after everything they've been through.
The support, the solidarity, it couldn't be stronger right now. As you say, a tense few hours ahead. Thank you so much for now, correspondent Nicole Zedek, speaking to us live from the Dead Sea. A quick break. When we get back, our rolling coverage continues on this breaking news edition. Stay tuned. Our breaking news coverage continues. I'm Benita Levine. The next set of Israeli hostages is heading home soon after being held captive by Hamas for more than 7 weeks since the terror onslaught on the 7th of October. It's the final day of a truce deal, a truce that may again be extended, this time by 4 days. Day 54 of the war. Today's list of 10 hostages includes women and teenage girls and boys. We have already seen 2 Israeli-Russian women, Irina Tati, aged 73, and Yelena Trupanov, aged 50. They are on your screen right now, being escorted by armed, masked terrorists out of a vehicle and handed over to the Red Cross. Their convoy has already come past into Israeli territory, and they are on their way to hospitals in Israel to be checked out here, still waiting for confirmation of exactly who is on that list of 10 Israeli hostages, including women and teenage girls and boys. And as we heard a little bit earlier, the family of Amit Shani, age 16 years old, confirming that he is believed to be on that list, heading home very soon. Now, the Bibas family are not on the list, and the IDF is looking into what it calls a cruel claim by Hamas that Mother Shiri and her sons, the youngest hostage, 10-month-old Kfir Bibas and 4-year-old Ariel Bibas, have been killed. The IDF says Hamas bears responsibility for the safety of all the hostages, even if Hamas did, in fact, hand the Bibas family to another terror faction in Khan Yunis. And I want to bring in Doron Avital here, because we now also are hearing that, according to Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, there are 159 people confirmed to be held captive still at the hands of Hamas. So while there is obviously going to be joy in the coming hours for the people reunited, there are still many more held hostage. How does this complicate efforts for a truce right now, or does it actually speed them up?
I think as long as our people in Qatar will succeed, and I think from what I hear, there's some rumor that there are more deals coming. As long as we can do those exchanges in terms of women, kids, uncombatant and not soldiers, then we have to follow it up. When it comes to the soldiers, it will be a major dilemma. But as long as we can do it with the credible threat that we are posing all the time, this is very important. Without this credible threat that every day in a minute decision we can follow up with our military campaign, nothing could have worked. So I think this is what we heard from Daniel Hagari. By the way, I think a very good spokesman.
No question about that.
It's really, because he's a Navy SEAL commander. You didn't expect from him to be so good in this thing, but he really represents some good Israeli spirit and sincerity and credibility, which is very important from
day one.
From day one, including the event with the missile that was shot by Jihad Islamic on the hospital. He took his time, but he was on the money, and when it was credibility is very important. So this is the game right now, credible threat. And in terms of the next phase of the war, to conclude something we talked earlier, there is the question of the how and the what, and this is why Blinken is here, and this is why what we heard even from the French defense minister. I mean, even from the perspective of the Israeli army, now that we are rooted in Gaza, we have the intelligence, we know much better, then our tactic may change. We can go more surgical, we can follow up. It's not the same phase. The first phase was different. We entered the terrain unknown. We had to be very aggressive in entering. We conquered some great portion of the northern Gaza. We have to think what next, and I'm sure the army thinks very meticulously how to conduct the next phase. And I would assume it will be different in terms of the tactics and the strategy and the operation on the ground from the first step.
Right. I mean, in an idea and almost a question to you, Doron, as well. You know, what had always been conceived of were Israel to be in a world where it was going in and ending Hamas control over the Gaza Strip. This is the idea that Avi Dichter talked about for so many years, that Yuval Steinitz talked about for so many years, where the model was the Operation Defensive Shield in 2002 in the West Bank, right? The idea that it wasn't necessarily the kind of warfare that we saw over the course of the last month and a half, but that it was a house-to-house warfare where it was done methodically, where it was not done in an overpowering way at one time. There was an element, of course, in that operation which went for 5 weeks, which was that way, but where it was lower intensity and went on for a longer period of time. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the Biden administration wants Israel to go, right? If you're trying to square the circle. On one hand, not calling for a full ceasefire, and seeming not to abandon the goal of ending Hamas control over the Gaza Strip, and seeming not to, although again, this is a question, abandoning the goal of eliminating Hamas's military capacity, but not wanting the kinds of scenes that we've seen over the course of the last month and a half, not wanting the kind of disruption to civilian life, certainly not wanting evacuations of civilian populations. Maybe this is a way of squaring the circle. And in that sense, if the concern in Israel a few weeks ago, with Eli Cohen's famous comments in our briefing, right, that the hourglass, the sand is going through the hourglass, the window of opportunity is narrower, maybe the way of expanding it, going back to comments even by Benny Gantz a few weeks ago, is that there wouldn't be a timetable, that this would take months and years, but it would be lower intensity, and maybe in that sense more sustainable diplomatically, although that there is risk there as well.
Yeah.
Certainly
it's a long-haul battlefield. It might take months, even a year. And then also there might be an end game which has to do with some diplomatic I want to mention Beirut of '82. We were there as veterans of this war. So this is a scenario that might be on the table.
And many questions about what it all means for Yahya Sinwar. Maybe he wants some safe passage out of Gaza. Who knows? Something we'll discuss down the line. Right now, more and more details are emerging about the conditions in captivity. Many children telling their families what they endured for 7 harrowing weeks. More in this report from our Robert Swift.
As Israeli hostages return home, the stories of their days spent in captivity underground or being moved between bombed buildings are filtering out.
They were kept in the houses for a few days, and then they took them to the tunnels.
Emily Hand's father described how his daughter returned from Gaza thin, pale, and believing that she had spent a year inside what she refers to as the box.
The most shocking, disturbing part of the meeting was she was just whispering. Couldn't hear her. I had to put my ear on her lips, like this close, and say, "What did you say?"
Some hostages have described being treated without abuse after the initial brutal violence of their capture. Others have spoken of beatings, repeated threats of violence, and of children being made to watch footage from the October 7th massacres.
Eitan apparently experienced horrors over there. Hamas forced them to watch horrific films. Maybe I'm naive, but I wanted to hope that he was well treated, but apparently not. They're monsters.
As the war has run on, conditions for captives appear to have deteriorated, with the quantity and variety of their food reducing.
And they haven't eaten well, and they're thin, they're exhausted.
Hamas has attempted to portray itself well, releasing video of smiling and waving captives being handed over to the Red Cross. But some of the hostages, even under duress, have not played along with their game. A long path to recovery awaits those recently returned to their families and to freedom.
They're not talking too much, but they are telling us some details that help us to help them.
A process that for each of the returned begins with a reunion.
So much pain, so much time is needed. Now we bring you this story. They've been married for just 2 years. Both love music. Yagev Bushtav and Rimon Kirsht abducted from their kibbutz on the 7th of October during that Hamas terror rampage. Rimon was released from captivity on Tuesday night after being held for more than 7 weeks by terrorists. Yagev is still in captivity. Rimon is now being dubbed an Israeli hero, having given a defiant stare to an armed terrorist during the release process. Look at that face, look at that stare, a defiant Rimon coming home. We now welcome Moran Betzer-Tayar, aunt of Yagev. Moran, thank you so much for being here. We can only imagine the range of emotions that you and your family have been going through. To start, how is Rimon doing?
First, thank you very much for letting me being here. Well, Rimon came back yesterday night, late at night, straight to the hospital. She met her parents and her sister. Relatively to the situation, she looks okay. But of course, today she needed to pass some exams, and then we will know better the physical situation. She's talking, she's telling, she met also today the parents of Yagev and his brother and sister, and she met also yesterday her dog, beloved dog, Tova, and she was surprised that Tova remembered her, but she really remembered her, and the hug and with the family, you can watch on the photos, and she's happy to be home. However, her first words were, bring back Yagev. We can't leave Yagev behind. He's part of me, he's half of me. So she urged us to fight and bring Yagev back home as soon as possible.
One can hardly imagine what she must be going through, what's happening in her mind. Do you know when she last saw him? At what point were they split up in captivity? What can you tell us?
I can say that on October 7th, when they were kidnapped from their home in Kibbutz Nirim, they were kidnapped together, and we know now that they were, they held hands all along the way. They didn't let the terrorists to separate them. However, during the captivity, we don't know exactly yet. We will know better tomorrow. But we know that Yagev is alive. We heard from other people that were released in the last couple of days. So we are not happy, but we are sure that we have a lot to do in order to bring him back home, and we sure that he is alive, and this is most important for her and for us.
We are hearing some horrific details from the hostages who have been freed, and obviously we are fully aware of the sensitivities around it, but we're hearing stories about children who are whispering and people who are adjusting to the light now because they spent so much time in tunnels, and others who were moved to various locations. What can you tell us about where she stayed for these harrowing 7 weeks?
As much as we know, she was held in one of the tunnels under the ground, and yes, she needs still to get used to the daylight. She's still in the hospital. Everything is very slowly. Slowly she meets more people. And then hopefully in a few days she will be stronger, and then we can start walking outside and all that. We also know that she's very... she needs to speak. She's not a kid, she's 36 years old. She needs to speak. She needs to tell. She wants to meet the people that she loves. And she really up to the fight. But we telling her, her parents and our beloved one, telling her, slowly, you need to adapt to the situation, to understand the reality. It's not the same Israel as you left on October 7th. So we are taking our time and her time, and we want her to be strong and to be a leader like in that video. And to lead all of us until they will come back home.
That video and that look and the way she walked out there was iconic. I think the description is so appropriate given the scenes that she was facing right now. You talk about her wanting to speak, and one can imagine somebody coming out of captivity wanting to connect. As you say, she's an adult, not a child, to connect with her loved ones again. What did she know about what had happened while she was away? It must be harrowing to have to be briefed about the atrocities that unfolded while she was being kidnapped.
I think today she knows better. Of course, yesterday when she arrived, she didn't know a lot. But today she already wore that and the shirt, and the parents showed her some activities that we did during that time in order to release them, and she was really excited, and she was crying, and she's really enthusiastic in order to start fighting, because really it's a couple that really never separated since they got married, and their love is something that should be told.
A true love story.
A true love story, and also with their pets and the music and all that things. And I hope that soon Yagev will come back, and they will, well, hopefully not to their previous life, because they can't go back to their kibbutz now, but at least to be together and to build something back together.
Just for our viewers, the necklace that Moran is referring to is a necklace that says "Bring them home," and thousands and thousands of people across the country are wearing them, part of the call to make sure that all hostages, all of them, young, old, men and women, are safely brought home. Moran, do you know, was Rimon alone when she was in captivity, or was she with a group of other hostages?
She wasn't alone, that for sure. We know some people that came back before her and told us that they met her. So she wasn't completely alone. But of course, I think what we heard is that all of them, they weren't alone maybe, but they felt alone. And they felt that, everything is like the little child, but also the adult one. They felt that it's not 2 months, almost 2 months. They felt that it's much longer. But I think they are typical Israeli, and they have some faith of our country, of our army, of the people of Israel, that they will never leave somebody behind. And I think this is the courage that we see in all of the hostages when they are coming back. They know we will never leave them behind us.
And that is something that we keep on hearing again and again, also from the families of the hostages, how the support and the solidarity, everybody wants everyone to come home, not just some people, not just young people. Every single hostage abducted on that day needs to get back home. You made mention of a life back in the kibbutz. Obviously, that's going to take time. Tova, the dog, hopefully this beautiful love story will have a happy ending and this couple can be reunited. But what does it look like for her to have to see what unfolded on the kibbutzim, and what is it going to take for people to genuinely feel safe there again? It's going to take a long time.
About Rimon, it's too soon, because she really came, it's less than 24 hours since she arrived. However, I think for all those from the kibbutzes and the other cities around, it's very difficult. But at least what I'm hearing is a lot of courage and a lot of strength, and they believe that they can build it again. However, we need our government and we need the world to understand that Gaza maybe need to be free, but they need to be free from Hamas, not from Israel, because Israel is already outside, and we should have a place that they can live peacefully. But surely we need a place, and the kibbutzes there need a place to live peacefully. And to do and to come back to their love stories and to the agriculture and to the green places that they used to have until the 7th of October.
Just from this conversation and just from seeing the images of Rimon, I feel like I know her. Tell us very briefly a bit about Yagev. What is he like?
Yagev is a very clever young man. He's very gentle. He's a quiet, talented musician. And he loves people, he loves animals, and he loves Rimon a lot.
I can feel that from the way you are talking about this couple. We can't wait to hear good news that they should be reunited, that they should have a beautiful future together with Tova and all the other pets that may exist. May they have many reasons to play music together. We so appreciate you being here, Moran Betzer Tayar, speaking to us, sharing the story. Thank you so much. And the whole nation is waiting for good news. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, and bring all of them back home soon.
Certainly is something the whole nation is waiting to see happen. Thank you very much. What a moving story, a beautiful love story. Let's hope the ending is a happy one, and let's hope that happy ending happens very soon. Thank you so much again for being here. Now, Noa Argamani was one of scores of people abducted from the Nova Music Festival on the 7th of October. She is still being held hostage. She is not in the group being released today. And her mother, Liora Argamani, is terminally ill. She just wants to see her daughter. Here's her urgent plea.
Shalom, ani Liora Argamani. Ima she Noa ayeta hayafa. She niktafa by civil okotofe. Adaya the Hamas the Aza. Ani holad Satan akshaw. Satan moa. Ani know that kama zmani shadi. Ani losa discord. She lilo the noa shedi. Bye bye. Ani holad nasibed we slavadon. Taviet noa shedi kama she yote mahe. Kada sheni masbik dilodota. Noa ani lo salakitla. Ima ani lo loata. At shetida sheni ohota haki habe. She ana kono sin asino hako kada she tise mahe. Kwa wala ohbin wata.
Liora Argamani just wants to see her daughter again. The heartbreak, the heartache, it's heart-wrenching, Doron.
I think this core belief that Israelis have that nobody will be left behind is very important, and we saw it in the testimonies. One of the symbols that the hostages, that the families of the hostages are using is the family of Rona, the picture of Ron Arad.
Exactly.
Our pilot that was under the captivity of Hezbollah, of a senior leader of Hezbollah. In Israel in '94, I was lucky enough to be the commander of the unit that was assigned by Yitzhak Rabin to do all the way to the Baka in a very daring operation to kidnap Mustafa Dirani, who was holding Ron Arad. This was '94. So Israel is willing to go a long way, taking high risk, risking soldiers, risking and paying prices if it's a deal, in order to rescue its people. This is a core belief that we have to stand, principle that every Israeli carries in his heart, and we have to keep it up.
Owen, while our heartstrings are being pulled by all these families waiting for word, and as we know, the next group of hostages is hopefully heading home soon, still the question remains around this truce and whether it's going to be extended at midnight. What is the latest on that front?
Right, well, I'll get to that actually by way of responding to something that you and Doron said. All of that is true. And at the same time, looking back at our past, we have to remember not only the lives and well-being of those hostages in the tunnels of Gaza, and we just heard the testimony about that, but God forbid the people whose lives will be affected, and in some cases lives will be lost, if Israel makes a mistake and does what it did in 2011 with the Gilad Shalit deal. One life was saved, one hostage was saved, and it was wonderful and it was emotional. But there were thousands of people, probably, thousands of Israelis, including 1,200 on October 11th, October 7th, rather, who directly or indirectly lost their lives because of that deal. These are hard decisions. It's not just a cliche.
Yeah, right.
And the definition of a hard decision means that your heart is pulled in two directions, that there are two different sets of stories and two different sets of criteria that have to be weighed. I think the vast majority of the Israeli public have supported the current deal, have felt that the risks that are being taken are manageable in this sense, and the pictures have been overwhelming, especially the hardship cases of the children. And there is overwhelming support. We haven't seen polls, but I think we haven't seen polls because we don't need to see polls to understand how the Israeli public feels about this current deal. I'll get to the truce extension in a moment. But Doron, you talked about the fact that as we move away from cases of children and women, it's problematic from Hamas's own perspective, its own interest to be holding them. So one reason why they're willing to settle, quote unquote, for less with them, to the harder cases and the harder asks that the other side has to be weighed and considered. As for the truce extension, fortunately, we're not at that point quite yet. What we're talking about right now in the immediate term, as the clock ticks either toward midnight or toward 7 in the morning, however you define when exactly this truce is set to expire, an extension in the sense of this current deal, right? With the arrangement we've become familiar with of 10 hostages freed each day in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners, women and minors, and an additional day of a truce, of course, with the humanitarian aid going into Gaza and so forth. Look, there are still contexts that we've said in Doha. There's no agreement. The clock is ticking. But I think the wide expectation, because of all I said, because Hamas would seem to have an interest in continuing this arrangement in the short term, I think the safer bet is that we will not actually see the Israeli military fighting in Gaza tomorrow, that we will see, again, the happier scenes of more hostages being freed tomorrow, the next day, maybe the day after that. But of course, next week, we start to move into different sets of decisions and different criteria, both for Israel and for Hamas. That day, of course, is approaching, although important to emphasize it's not yet here.
Just a few seconds left.
I
Your
would
final
say
thoughts.
a long haul in the battlefield, in diplomacy, in deals of exchange. Who knows what's next, but we have to be prepared and prepared to issue the campaign again once we have to and see what's up.
Doron Avital, Owen Alterman, thank you both so much for being here for this breaking news edition. We wait for word on what will happen next. It's a wrap for now for this edition of our breaking news coverage. The sixth group of hostages are heading home soon. Our rolling coverage continues, so make sure you stay tuned for all the latest developments as they happen. Eli Hochenberg is up next. I'm Bernice Levine. Thank you for watching.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Hello and welcome to the special broadcast here at I24 News. Day 54 of the war here in Israel. Day 6 of the ceasefire. This hour, we are all still waiting for 10 hostages to be released after earlier tonight, Irina Tati and Elena Trupanov, two Israeli women with a dual Russian citizenship, got out of Hamas captivity. This hour, diplomatic source here in Israel is saying that unless a list for tomorrow's hostage release is to be provided, the IDF will go back to fighting as early as tomorrow morning. And as we are all waiting, all we can hear are whispers, kids whispering. The Israeli children who went through hell and back, coming back home from Hamas's vicious hands, are all whispering because the terrorists who held them for long, long weeks forbid them to make any noise. So they're still whispering. Kids, no daylight, moldy pita bread with sand, murky water, no showers, sleeping vertically, some forced to watch the videos of the October 7 horrors. Kids. And as there are still nearly 160 people in Hamas captivity, the thought of what they're currently going through every hour, every minute, is not letting go. Back here, at home, this is the dying wish of Liora Argamani, whose daughter Noah is being held hostage. Liora has fatal cancer, and her only desire is to see her daughter one final time.
Shalom, ani Liora Argamani, ima she Noah ayeta hayafa, she nichtafa be civil okotofe, adayada Hamas Gaza, ani cholad Satan akshaw. Satan moa, ani noyotat, kama zmani shali. Ani losa discord, sheli loda noa sheli. Bye bye. Ani kolad nasibed, ve slavadon. Tavieta noa sheli kama sheyote mahe. Kada sheni masvik dilodota. Noa, ani losa lakitla. Ima ani no loata. Shetida, she ani ohota hahi habe. She anakono sin asino hako kadashi tise mahe. Kwa wala ohobin wata.
We're all waiting here. And we want to cross now live to I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseron at the Rim Junction in southern Israel. Ariel, we're still waiting for those hostages to be released. What do we know? What's the latest?
Right, Ellie. So the latest is that the convoy appears to be delaying already in the transfer from Hamas to the Red Cross, according to reports in Israeli media just in the past 2 minutes. The explanation from the Hamas side is that it's due to technical challenges, but that it will happen, and the 10 hostages expected to be released today, 5 women, 5 minors, will be released later this evening. Obviously, a lot of anticipation here in Israel for their arrival. Now, about an hour ago, we saw the convoy carrying Yelena and Irina, who made their way back to Israel before the group of 10 hostages. They passed through us, and there was a lot of excitement here in Urim Junction, one of the communities near the Gaza border, while Urim Junction, where I'm standing, was actually a haven for many of the partygoers at that Nova Music Festival. They fled to here. So again, we're going to see some source of hope and salvation come from here, Urim Junction in southern Israel, but obviously waiting with much anticipation. Now, we are starting to get reports throughout Israeli media as to the challenging circumstances and conditions that many of these hostages were placed in. For instance, you mentioned the kids that were forced to whisper, or the Israeli or Thai released hostages saying that Jewish hostages received more severe conditions and more severe treatment by the Hamas captives. Some of them were beaten with electric cables. This is a testimony coming from one of the Thai hostages. There were 19 Thai hostages released so far. 13 remain, and there are still, after today, going to be 25 women and children hostages remaining, in addition to 149 following today's 10.
Yes, and more horrific details on what is unfolding in captivity in the Gaza Strip being released. We will have more on that later on in the program. Thank you very much, I-24 News Senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osron for this. And we want to move now to I-24 News correspondent Zach Anders at the Sheba Medical Center, awaiting more released. We should get used to this new term, not hostages, but released. We're not quite there yet.
Hi, Ellie. Yes, these freed individuals that are on their way. We're hearing at least 4 are expected tonight at Sheba Medical Center. This is coming from the hospital director, but that could change. There's so much at play when it comes to evaluating their condition, literally as they're in the vehicles through the crossings on their way to the helicopters that will then transport them by air to hospitals throughout Tel Aviv. Of course, there's hospitals along the route that are on standby in case the conditions of these individuals warrants it. The helicopters rather can deviate to several locations in the south, but they do have a larger care team arranged here with a range of specialists that are prepared to address a variety of needs. And so the ultimate goal will be to have them stay overnight here at hospitals in Tel Aviv. We're hearing potentially some of the older individuals that were released are coming our direction. Of course, we're going to have to wait and see when exactly that does happen. But this is also a children's hospital, and should there be any young individuals, we're seeing, of course, on the list that it does appear that the on the younger side individuals will be teenagers, but still, again, the hospitals here are prepared to receive any and everyone.
Right, and as we speak and awaiting more, hopefully many more in the coming days. Zach, what about those who are there physically and mentally, as much as we can say, of course?
It does appear that for what they've been through, their conditions are rather good. The hospital staff here say that almost everyone they've seen has lost at least 10 to 20% of their body weight, that they've been without consistent meals. And the concerns for the hospital, especially on the children's hospital side and the pediatric doctors, is that when kids go a certain stretch of time, of course, these are children. They're growing, they're developing, and if you interrupt that process, of regular meals, water, you add on the stress and the emotional toll, that can have serious implications for their development as they age and grow older. So we're seeing, of course, quite a bit of activity as they prepare for this arrival here. And the hospital staff, for what it's worth, are hopeful. They're happy. They're happy that they get to do their jobs, and they're ready for whatever comes their way.
Yes, some emotional moments still ahead, and of course, tension ahead of the pending release of 10 more hostages tonight. Thank you very much, Zach Anders, our 24 News correspondent at the Sheba Medical Center, for this. And now, our last stop for this part of the show, our 24 News correspondent Nicole Tzedek at the David Dead Sea Resort, where thousands of Israeli refugees in their own country, that's the only way to define it, are residing there since October 7th. Nicole, as just said, emotional days for all of us, but more so for them. We're still in the middle of the war, and they're still waiting for any indication of when, how, where they'll be able to go back to some sort of a normal routine, if that's even possible.
Not only waiting for that, Ellie, but right now, mainly waiting to see which of their community members might finally return back to them after more than 50 days in Hamas captivity. Specifically, right now, what you're seeing behind me is residents from Kibbutz Be'eri. They've been here at this hotel for nearly 2 months now. They don't have a home anymore in the south. So while they're anxiously waiting, watching this screen, their eyes glued to the screen to see any news, to see those first moments when some of these 10 Israeli hostages might finally be passed over to the Red Cross and finally enter back into Israeli territory. But it comes with a mixed bag of emotions, Ellie, because as grateful as they are to hopefully see some of their residents on that screen, they also know that they don't have a home to welcome them back to, that they're coming back here. So many of their community members have been lost. So many of their community members still held in Gaza. And so it truly is not only an anxious waiting period right now, but also a very emotional time as well. We're seeing a slight glimmer of hope, and they want to see more and more people brought home. The harsh reality that they're coming back to is something that these kibbutz communities and these community members are certainly, it's difficult for them to try and explain to those hostages that have been kept so far.
Right, we don't talk about much, but those hostages who are coming back, so much catching up to do, so many family and friends that they've lost, gut-turning situation. Nicole Tzedek in the Dead Sea, thank you very much for this, Nicole. And we want to welcome now here in studio 24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman and Major General Eitan Dangot, former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much for joining us. Owen, I do want to begin with you because we do know that the War Cabinet is set to convene in less than an hour from now, set to discuss an extension, and yet the hostages of today are not yet released, and the list of the hostages of tomorrow is not yet in.
Yeah, welcome to our world that we've become. Yeah, obviously the frustration is shared. I can only imagine how the families feel. Oh, look, I think the understanding is that for all the fits and starts, that the passage of the hostages today will happen. Although, of course, you're right, Ellie, in pointing out it's 10 o'clock local time here in Israel, and it hasn't really gotten underway in earnest, and that's obviously very concerning. As for the list of hostages tomorrow, to be fair, there's no agreement to extend the truce for tomorrow, so one would imagine those two will have to happen in tandem.
Yeah.
Right? And that getting the list is part of the, and who is on the list, one would imagine is part of the negotiation. Obviously a negotiation that's going down to the wire, depending on how you look at it. This truce either expires in less than 2 hours from now, at midnight local time, or at 7 in the morning, which is the time of day where it started on that first Friday, which would give the negotiators a bit more time. Look, I think the prevailing wisdom, if you just look at the interests of the two sides, is that an extension of the current deal, again, with the 10 hostages being freed a day in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners, and with another day of truce with aid going into the Strip, that's an arrangement that both sides seem pleased with. I think, overwhelming part of Israeli public opinion is pleased with this and feels that the risks that Israel is taking are worth those incredible rewards of seeing, and we're seeing again, well, these pictures are the pictures of the crowds in Gaza, maybe orchestrated by Hamas mobbing the hostages, but the happier pictures of actually them being reunited in their families.
But I do want us to stay with those images, because Major General Dangot, we're seeing those 2 hostages released earlier tonight, and we've seen it as a rising trend, I would say, in recent days, that they are being released again in visuals that are evidently well orchestrated by Hamas, being brought to the Red Cross with surrounded by armed terrorists, but not just that, with an angry or cheering mob. The masses are there. These images are difficult to digest.
This is the regular pictures that you see mostly every evening. Look, you see elder ladies, over I think 80, coming with their pajama, and they are surrounded by those terrorists with guns. And you see also the little demonstration like theater organized by the public that Hamas is organizing. By the way, I would like to emphasize 3 things about those 2 ladies. First, I myself estimate that Hamas will divide between Israelis that are coming like after the asking by Putin or by his people to release them, because if you remember at the beginning of this negotiation, the Thai came to Tehran and then won special activities by Iran, Hamas, Malaysia and other good countries, and they separate because they are completely foreigners. The Russian asked Hamas, came an independent delegation from Hamas after what happened on the 7th of October
to Moscow,
sat with the high senior officials from Moscow by, I think the head of them was Musa Abu Marzouk, if I'm not mistaken, and they deal independently like they are identify or welcome country that is coming. And now I was sure after that meeting that Hamas will make emphasis to show that they did it by themselves, to get credit from Russia, and by it show. So that is the reason they divide the 2 hostages that come. Look at the picture, how old they almost cannot walk in, and you see what is around them. But this is like a kind of a step, a welcome step by Hamas towards Russia to get as more as they can get in this kind of theater, tragic theater, I may say, about this issue. And I think the others will join tonight. I myself can say at the beginning of this show, sitting together, that I estimate that we will face the day 7th, 8th on Thursday, Friday, and even the 9 and 10 day to complete this kind. My question mark is only on one thing, whether I hope that Hamas has all the hostages. They refuse to supply names. They refuse to make it from the beginning. And I believe that this step of 10 steps of releasing 10 people averagely every day will be over, and then will come the main sensitive junction.
Right.
What will be next? Whether it's going to continue the war, whether it's going to be pressure on Israel by United States, Qatar, Egypt to continue on trying to bring something that convince Israel to go on with this kind of release. It is the sensitive junction. And one remark to your very emotional start of this show. You said about the speaking low,
the whispers,
yes, the children that are sitting. I would add to it, it's a silence cry in these rooms.
I couldn't possibly find better words to define it, Major General Dangot. Silent cries, really is. But to your point, let's take a listen to what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say today on what we're likely to see in the coming days. More diplomatic efforts, going back to war, both. Let's take a listen.
בתחילת המלחמה אני קבעתי 3 יעדים.
From the beginning of the war, I set 3 goals: the elimination of Hamas,
the return of all our abductees, and to ensure that Gaza will never again be a threat to Israel. These three goals remain in place. In the last week, we achieved a very great achievement, the return of many dozens of our abductees. A week ago, it would have sounded imaginary, but we have achieved it. But in the last few days, I hear a question. After this phase of returning our abductees is exhausted, will Israel return to fighting? So my answer is an unequivocal yes.
Owen Alterman, before we talk about the dynamic of the diplomatic efforts, I do want to circle back to a point Major General Dangote made earlier. On the one hand, I will phrase my question that way. It seems that Hamas, Yahya Sinwar most notably, is playing a dual game here, and not a big surprise, but in the sense that on the one hand, showing great control over what is happening, both in terms of the hostage release and also when it comes to orders to, terrorists in the northern part where Israel is said to have a full control almost. But on the other hand, he's playing this game in which he can't really vouch for all hostages. Most tragically, the ongoing saga of the Bibas family that is just tearing Israel's heart apart. So, as most cases, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But what indications do we have as for Hamas's true control over the situation?
Well, listen. Obviously, in the southern part of the Strip, much greater, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think everyone understands that. In the northern part of the Strip, much less. But look, obviously, Ellie, you're right. There may certainly be a heavy dose of manipulation there as well. But on the other hand, it's conceivable, at least, that there's a measure of truth, right? I mean, Hamas obviously has control over 2/3 of the Gaza Strip, at least in terms of geography, right? And still has armed fighters in the north, apparently. But it's also possible, we know that there are other factions in the Gaza Strip that are armed, and once you are armed, you have leverage, even if Hamas exerts overall control. And at least it seems to me, I defer to Eitan Dangote on this, that Gaza, even with Hamas in ultimate or effective control of the territory, still has powerful subgroups that have some leverage over Hamas and with which Hamas needs to work. Okay? Again, we saw this in earlier rounds of fighting, which feel like ancient history, the game between Hamas and Islamic Jihad, for example.
And even smaller
groups, like the Salafi groups of way back when, right? That there are independent actors in the Gaza Strip over which Hamas doesn't always exercise complete day-to-day control, and with which Hamas at some level needs to negotiate.
Right.
So it's at least conceivable that the story Yahya Sinwar is telling has some element of truth. Now, the Israeli government, I suspect, we know they're doing two things. Number one, most importantly, I think, our intelligence services, for all of their failings on October 7th and understanding some of the dynamics in Gaza, presumably are getting to the bottom of this and presenting, at least behind closed doors, an accurate picture as best it can put it together of what the state of play is here, right? And what the balance is between manipulation and truth. And the other thing that Israel is saying publicly, and obviously convincingly, is at the end of the day, Hamas is held responsible, right? Whatever dynamics there are between Hamas and these other groups is Hamas's problem. Israel is negotiating with Hamas. It's not negotiating with Islamic Jihad. It's not negotiating with crime families in Gaza or whoever else. Israel is negotiating with Hamas. And if Hamas wants to enter into a deal with Israel, Hamas has to be able to supply the deliverables. And the deliverables in this case are human beings. And Hamas is responsible for doing what it can to deliver them. And if at the end of the day he can't deliver them, there's going to be no deal, right? If there aren't going to be 10 hostages freed tomorrow, it's reasonable to say there will be no extension of the truce tomorrow. That's the bottom line. And either Hamas can deliver them or it can't. And Israel is demanding that Hamas deliver them from within the categories that were agreed, right? So again, women and children, because there are still women and children in the Gaza Strip, many of them presumed to be alive, I suspect, including by Hamas. And the Israeli government is saying whatever the internal dynamics are of the Gaza Strip is yours to manage. You come to us, either you're going to be able to abide by a deal that is according to the bargain that we struck, or you're not.
And to that point, exactly, Major General Dangote, and you've alluded to that earlier, Owen is stressing, according to this agreement, according to this deal, in which it was agreed one Israeli hostage, one woman or child, for three Palestinian hostages to be released. If we are to move to other groups, as in elderly men, younger men, etc. Soldiers, of course. The demand by Hamas might change, meaning more prisoners.
You're right. This deal has been declared for the potential of 10 first steps. For this 10 people every time, you have to give something like 30 people to release.
1 to 3.
Yes, 1 to 3. The next step that I believe now they're working on them as well already. In my opinion, it has been already and under a process of discussion. There is, of course, who will be the next stages. I believe it will be from, like they call, light to the difficult. It means women, and then will come the men, and then will come soldiers, female and men, together and this will be another story. Don't forget, in my opinion, Sinwar is not carried what's going, that is getting 30 people every evening. From him, the main goal now is to stop the war, to complete his achievements, to finally it with his dream. His dream is to release all the Hamas prisoners from the Israeli jail. And for that, it will be a joint venture together of what he did at the beginning. In my opinion, even I estimate, you remember he always said 1-1-1-1. That is the day was agreed to release him on the 12th October 2011. This is the 1-1-1-1 in my opinion, that he always, because he is the head of the prisoners, this psychological, unnormal guy, animal, what you can call him, is right, but we don't have to talk about him too much. We know who is before us. He will make another price. And the most important thing for him is to stay in Gaza. If we have any kind of expectation that on Sunday will be such agreement, we will not be there. Now, with your permission, if we have time, we are coming to the Israeli junction. Whether to go on modularic in these stages or to go as we will not stop it, with the main goal of destroy Hamas leadership and destroy Hamas organization. In simple words, renew the war, renew the fire. And that is what is the meaning of it. Stopping, meanwhile, the negotiation about the hostages. That will be a very sensitive junction.
It is. I'm sorry. It is. And I think from the diplomatic perspective, there are two different competing, schools of thought on this. One school of thought, which has been the kind of traditional school of thought over the course of the first month of the war or more, is the Eli Cohen, for lack of a better term, school of thought, the diplomatic hourglass, the stand going through the hourglass, the window of opportunity closing, the clock ticking. So Israel needs to hit Hamas very, very hard because it's bound to lose international support and needs to win the war before that support expires. That's one view. The other view is the Benny Gantz view, What did Benny Gantz say memorably at a press conference? We have to get the hostages out now. We have a lot of time to defeat Hamas. Anyway, we'll unpack this more over the course of the broadcast. I think it tells us a lot about where we're going.
Absolutely. So hold your thoughts right there. We're still waiting on, of course, the hostage release. 3 minutes, and we're back.
ממשלת ישראל לפעול.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We're still awaiting the release of 10 more Israeli hostages tonight. Delay Hamas officials are dubbing due to logistical issues, and yet not our first rodeo. Hamas playing games day in, day out. We are, of course, closely following that. But before we get back to the discussion here in the studio, let's take a listen to War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, who's saying very clearly Israel will continue to try to make the most of the hostage deal, but take a listen.
We are now at very complex moments in a window of opportunities in the frame of the return of the hostages. We shall do whatever we can in order to finish it. But together with that, we are also ready to go back to the fighting in every given moment, including these very minutes. The state of Israel is waging a very complex, many arenas campaign with the responsibility of maintaining the Zionist project and forging it. People want to kill us. They still do. And we have no other choice. We must continue to fight.
Back here in the studio with Major General Eitan Dangot and I24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman. Owen, as Major General Dangot defined it earlier, Israel is nearing a junction that you phrased as the Eli Cohen school of thought, as in let's go fast in terms of the war on the ground because there is an international clock ticking, or the Benny Gantz school of thought?
Right. I don't know that the junction necessarily is between the school of thought, but the schools of thought give us a sense of how Israel should be approaching the junction and what the trade-offs are. Remember, again, as we said before the break, Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, I named the school of thought after him because he's the most associated with it, because the briefing he gave to us, right, famously or infamously, if you will, saying that Israel had a 2 to 3 week window of opportunity until the sand went through the hourglass, international support ended. I said at the time I didn't agree with that assessment. By the way, we are just about to approach.
And Eli Cohen agreed with you because he softened his remark.
And it was taken out of context from the beginning because of the way we were allowed to report it. At any rate, we're actually, by the way, I believe about to hit the 2-week mark of that without any real appreciable increase of pressure, right? Again, the pressure was there then, it's there now, but it hasn't appreciably increased.
Right.
At any rate, if you're in the Eli Cohen school of thought, you really do have a very, very dramatic decision ahead, because it's an either-or decision, right? Either you go for freeing the hostages, potentially at the expense of not being able to win the war, or you, in a sense, put the hostages aside and focus on winning the war. If you're in the Benny Gantz school of thought, and remember, I named it after him because he said it at a press conference, the hostages need to be freed now because that's the urgency, right? Given their physical condition, given their mental condition, given the conditions on the ground, and given the history of Israel's history in terms of hostage releases. That's the urgency. There are years to defeat Hamas, as Benny Gantz said. And you almost were taken aback from when he said that because it was almost against conventional wisdom. It can't be both unless, in a sense, it can.
Right.
How can the Benny Gantz contention work? It can work if the type of warfare in the next phase of the war is different from the initial one, right? Less intensive, more long-term, more sustainable, more methodical, with more of a focus, it would seem to me, on special forces raids, on arrests, on pinpoint assassinations, on things that are more targeted, but without immediate results, right? With results that take a very, very long time to be able to materialize, right? And maybe that's what he had in mind. And obviously, the benefits for that approach were that it might be more helpful in keeping diplomatic support. By the way, if you read between the lines...
Because if it takes longer, it means that you need the support to last long.
That's right. I mean, on one hand, one argument is, again, the Eli Cohen argument, right? It doesn't matter how intense the war is, right? The effort is, there's still an impact on Gazan civilians, and so the support expires.
Right.
The Gantz argument is it does depend. I'm sort of elaborating what I think he meant, right? It does depend on the intensity of the war. Why? Because if the war is less intense, the impact on civilians is lower, the prominence in international media is lower, and therefore the support can be sustained for a longer period of time. And given the urgency of releasing the hostages, for reasons we talked about, right, it's better to bet that a lower intensity war can be sustained for a longer time diplomatically. What are the upshots? I mean, again, if you actually read between the lines of what Antony Blinken is saying, and of course he's here in Israel tomorrow, so we'll get a better sense.
Exactly what I want.
This seems to be where the Biden administration is leading Israel, right? On one hand, not calling for a ceasefire, not taking the French route, okay, let alone the route in the Arab world or the UN or other places. Not calling for a ceasefire, but calling for more protection of Gazan civilians and more humanitarian aid. And maybe this is where the United States wants to lead Israel. In the additional argument on behalf of this school of thought is, just by its nature, and here's where I'm really interested to hear what Eitan Dangot, given his experience, has to say, the form of warfare in the South just simply can't be the way it was in the North, because the civilian population is there. It's going to be very, very difficult to remove or move the civilian population in the South the same way it was done from north to south, right? Just given the geography and, frankly, the season as we move more into the winter. And therefore, the kind of warfare in the North, even if it were Israel's better option, might, it seems to me, not be sustainable or realistic. And so you put that all together, you almost have to, in that sense, believe or bet on the Benny Gantz school of thought. And if that's the case, then the stakes are somewhat lower, right? You release the hostages now, and you have plenty of time to move on with that kind of strategy.
All right, we will hold that thought right here, because we do want to reshift our focus now back to the released, the freed. Again, this new term we're getting used to, and hopefully will replace the term hostages altogether very soon. Medical teams continue their gentle, loving care to the many children who's been to hell and back, slowly but surely helping them to get back on their feet. Here's the latest update from the Schneider's Children's Hospital.
The children are in stable physical condition. They are presenting various medical challenges and also psychosocial challenges that we are attending to. Most of them are expected to be released in the coming days to their places of accommodation, except one child who has required longer medical treatment followed by rehabilitation.
We're being evaluating them for the weight loss, which is about 10 to 17% of body weight for most of them. And then for deficiencies, everybody are getting supplements to start with, and then tailored with the specific types of deficiencies that they have. And we're going to follow this up, but this has a meaning, especially in pediatrics, and the consequences of such undernutrition for such a long time, for more than 50 days.
And we have witnessed many moments in those past days that will forever be engraved in our consciousness. One of them, this tight embrace of Maya Ansin, hugging, squeezing her two daughters, 15-year-old Daphna, 8-year-old Ella El-Kayam, both released from Hamas captivity earlier this week after 51 days in captivity. And no matter how many times I'm seeing this video, yeah, it makes you want to squeeze them, all three of them, every time anew. And we want to welcome now Lihi Zin, the aunt of Daphna and Ella. Lihi, thank you very much for joining us. I can only imagine what your sister, you, the entire family been through. But before I ask you about that, how are Daphna and Ella?
Hi, good evening. Daphna and Ella are enjoying the good time with us, with the family. They are still at the hospital. There is a lot of professionals around them, and they are surrendered with hugs and kisses and love from all the family. Of course, we were waiting for this 51 days, as you know.
Yeah.
We were here terrified. We were in a horror, thinking what is going on with them. And we are we are excited to be in this moment. The video that you mentioned before, we saw it ongoing, so many times to make sure that it's real before we hug them for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we're speaking with you, we were watching this video throughout our conversation, and again, it really speaks louder than all words. A hug of a mother. Nothing is more powerful than that. And yet, Lihi, we're hearing some gut-turning details coming out from those who were released, the freed hostages, about what they've been through. And I assume it is very hard on all of you, whether to ask questions, to help Daphna and Ella vent, or let them speak when they're ready, if and when at all.
Yeah, when they will be ready, of course, they can speak. Of course.
Yeah, but and again, I assume that it's you learn as you go, whether to try and ask or let them talk on their own. What have you been hearing from them that you would like to share? No pressure, of course.
So yeah, this is the point, no pressure. That's why in our family, we decided not to go to this point. There is a psychiatrist, there is a psychologist who taking care of it, and there is doctors, physicians, and investigator people, and we are the family. We are here to love them, to hug them, to kiss them, to wrap them with a lot of glitters and pink and a good future. That's why we are focused on this, and we leave to the professionals to do the job, let's say.
Yes, and you fulfill your role to love them and to hug them. You're so right, Lihi. And before we thank you and let you go, you know, the families of the hostages becoming a family of their own to an extent in those horrific weeks are staying united in their fight to release all of them. And yet it seems that we are the country that is nearing a moment when the ceasefire will end at some point.
For this, I don't know. I'm not a general and I'm not from the army. But yeah, we are definitely now a big family, unfortunately. We're still fighting. I mean, even if the girls at home, we're still fighting with all the rest. This is a one for all and all for one. And we won't stop until the last hostage will come home. We are still with them, even if the gore is at home. We are still on the fight, on the battle.
One for all and all for one. Lihi Zin, the aunt of Ella and Daphna. We're sending a big hug from here, and I hope that you will squeeze each other as much as you can. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Yes, so many of those emotional moments, again, hopefully many more to come. And yet, Major General Dangot, if we're circling back to what's happening on the ground, it is a ceasefire. Allegedly no movement, or there should be no movement on the ground.
There was again
and yet, exactly, Israeli soldiers are saying, we are sensing that Hamas is getting ready for the renewal of fire.
Yeah, it was expected. You are dealing with liars, with those butchers that, with all the tension around the hostages, don't forget thousands of soldiers are deployed all over the area of the north part of Gaza, and they are in a lot of operational kind of defense that you should react offensively to each event, and besides, you have to use a lot of intelligence sources in order to identify what Hamas is preparing. Because Hamas, of course, is going to make few things from the terror side or from the military side. First of all, they are going to bring back all the logistic support to the underground country they have from the north till the south. There is no lack of fuel, I'm sure now, no lack of food. They have enough things for the continuing of staying for another weeks. Secondly, they are collecting intelligence on IDF deployment. They estimate what will be the IDF future steps, and they are preparing a kind of a line of defense. They are reacting as an army. That is something we should understand from the first moment. We are fighting against army in the most complicated area for urban war that you can plan with the north part of Gaza now. It's a different, by the way, in the south. On the other end, we are see that in the last 2 days, today and yesterday, we see two events with Hamas terrorists. It's like kind of examination,
testing the waters,
trying to cheat, to pay attention on one area and to make things in the other. This is something on the shoulders of IDF, and the support that the commanders of IDF, Interior Security Service, gave to the war cabinet to decide, and I support it, that hostages has to get priority and they will deal with the circumstances. It doesn't mean the plans of offensive or the new plan has been changed. You will see maybe a new surprise. You will be, or everybody is looking what will be the end of the north. We have some places in the north we should take by the ground.
The IDF chief of staff saying today that,
by the way, according what was mentioned before, it's another story for military way. There you have more space. We are not going to move again, in my opinion, the civilian to other direction. Maybe we will ask those on the refugees area on the center part of Nusrat, Muazi, Burej, to move also to the south. And Khan Yunis is now looking as the capital,
the last bastion
of the capital. So the demands, the things can be changed, the maneuvering can be changed. And I may say to what you mentioned, and you were right, in my opinion, the timetable of Benny Gantz and the Foreign Affairs Minister Eli Cohen are not meeting. Gantz is looking for the immediate chance to bring back home more as we can, and know that from the military point you are developing such a kind of a process. At the beginning will be with full power, but from the beginning we say to move Hamas from Gaza you need months, not weeks only, months and even a year. But the main game changer is to move the leadership and to break the most part of Hamas like the north part is nowadays.
That's a fascinating and a very important comment. I mean, one last very quick thought. I mean, one downside that I forgot to mention of this is for Benny Gantz, maybe there are years to destroy Hamas, but maybe not for the people who live in Be'eri.
Exactly.
Or Kfar Aza, or Sderot, right? The people who live in the communities alongside the Gaza Strip.
Because Benjamin Netanyahu stated today, added like a sub goal, if you will, objective to this war, to bring back the hostages, to dismantle Hamas, and to make sure that there will be no threat from the Gaza Strip towards Israel, and that means that Israeli civilians will be able to go back to the border. We will once again hold that thought, gentlemen, because we do want to hear what the Supreme Leader of Iran has to say, right? Iran's policy is not, and I'm quoting, to throw Zionists and Jews into the sea. Yes, we live in a time and age. These clarifications are actually made. And a second later, of course, a vow that October 7th will keep on happening until American dominance in the Middle East is erased. Take a listen.
They falsely claim that Iran says Zionists or Jews must be thrown into the sea. This was said by others in the past, by some Arabs. We never said that. We won't throw anyone into the sea. We say the decision is for the people to make. The government elected by the votes of the Palestinians will decide on the people who are there and have come from other countries. It might allow all of them to stay in Palestine.
And we want to turn now to Dr. Eli Carmon, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Counterterrorism at the Rachman University. Dr. Carmon, thank you very much for joining us. Well, Khamenei talking about erasing American agenda to diminish American efforts to forge a new Middle East. I'm using his words. There's not much room for interpretation here, is there?
Good evening. Yes, Iran clearly expresses its desires and strategy for so many years. So even if there is now some kind of more moderate language, actually we see that they are maneuvering on all the fronts. Their proxies, not only in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, in Syria and Iraq, and even in far away Yemen. So the Iranian goal is to try to destroy Israel, or to at least to weaken it very much, but without paying the price on their territory, on their most important strategic interest, especially the nuclear project.
But yes, again, listening to Khamenei's statements today, this notion, this Iranian notion of little Satan and big Satan, as in Israel and the U.S., as they define it, seems to be underlined. Again, talking a lot about the American dominance in the Middle East, not so much, not just about Israel. And in this respect, Dr. Carmon, Saudi Arabia, who has so far stayed out of it as much as possible, of course, is now offering to invest in Iranian economy in a bit to contain its terror activity through its proxies. But can you really throw money at this problem?
We know that already from March this year, there was an agreement sponsored by China, by the way, which improved greatly the diplomatic relationship between China, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And there were even visits at the highest level. But almost parallelly, the Saudis began the normalization process with Israel, and moreover, they tried to build a strategic alliance with the United States, which would permit them to build a nuclear project on their territory. And this worried very much the Tehran leadership, which attacked personally the Saudi leadership. And then you have the attack, 7th of October attack by Hamas. One of the main goals of this attack, clearly from the Hamas point of view, but clearly also from the Iranian point of view, was to sabotage, to derail the normalization process between Israel and the Saudis. Yeah. So I think that what they saw, the Saudis, especially the intervention of Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen, firing missiles above almost the Saudi territory, and also using Iraqi pro-Iranian militias against Israel, but also threatening, I think, Saudi Arabia. They are worried that the conflict will regionalize, and they prefer, like in the agreement with China, to try to assuage a bit the Iranians and find a modus operandi at least until the end of the conflict in Gaza, and the solution, possibly a positive solution from the Saudi point of view, in Gaza itself.
And Dr. Carmon, I do want to insist on that, because the solution, or the in-between solution Saudi Arabia is coming up with is again, to pay Iran to hold back on its terror activity.
Clearly, clearly these are economic incentives to a regime which is in a very dire situation economically, and they think that perhaps this could help at this moment. I don't believe that Iran will change because even after the beginning of the conflict in Gaza, Saudi Arabia, MBS personally, the Crown Prince and President Biden declared that immediately after the end of the conflict in Gaza, they will retake the negotiations for the strategic alliance with the United States and also normalization with Israel. So the Iranians clearly are very worried about it, and the Saudis are trying to find the modus vivendi, on the one hand with the United States and Israel, and the other hand with the Iranians. So they know that economic incentives are very important for the regime. Personally, I don't think that it would work because the Iranians are now convinced that they are in a very strong position to weaken Israel. Perhaps if there is no, I would say, destruction of Hamas in Gaza, even to provoke a kind of weakness of the Israel vis-a-vis the other enemies, especially vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And Dr. Kalman, before we let you go, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be arriving here in Israel once again. He should really buy a new passport, so issue a new passport rather, since the beginning of this war. And much talk, of course, on the day after. The American vision is perhaps to get clearer, but when it comes to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Jordanian, what is their desire? What would they like to see in Gaza?
I think that the United States, President Biden has presented his views in an article in the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Personally, I have written for many years that, in my opinion, the destruction of Hamas is necessary in order to achieve some kind of expansion of the Palestinian Authority presence in Gaza, in order to stabilize, to pacify, to develop economically Gaza, and then to try to begin some kind of political negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I'm not sure that this government is able to do or willing to do this, because we heard the declarations of Prime Minister Netanyahu, but I know that many in the defense establishment and the political arena think that this is one of the best solutions, because otherwise I don't think that we have the possibility or even the resources to control Gaza for many years and to keep everything there working on the civil administrative issues.
Dr. Ali Kalman, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Rahman University. Thank you very much, Dr. Kalman, for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we want to show now first pictures of Irina Tati alongside IDF forces back in Israel after 54 days in captivity, and it is an hour till midnight, and the release of 10 Israeli hostages tonight is yet to move forward.
Although, Ellie, Israel Channel 13 is reporting that an Israeli source says that the 10 hostages are actually in the hands of the Red Cross.
All right.
Great news if that's true. And our channel has pushed that a Hamas official has said that the release will happen tonight, and repeating what Hamas has already said over the course of the night, for what it's worth, that the delay was because of a, quote, logistical issue.
All right, and indeed we're seeing now reports that this first transition from Hamas's hands to the Red Cross has been made in those last few minutes, meaning those 10 hostages are en route to Israel. And on that note, we will take a 3-minute break, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with all the updates from the ground.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she. As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Well, good news at last. The 10 Israeli hostages have been transferred from Hamas's vicious hands to the Red Cross, meaning they're one step closer to coming back home here to Israel. And we want to turn now live to the ground. I-24 News correspondent Zaka Anders at the Sheba Medical Center, where some of the hostages are set to arrive at the end of yet another long night. What can we say, Zach?
Hi, Ellie. Well, we are playing the waiting game, so the information that comes through is sparse because the challenge is getting them here. They have a lengthy journey to come from the south of Israel to these hospitals in Tel Aviv. There are still some of the released from the previous days that are still staying in this hospital from what we've been able to tell. They are in good condition, good spirits, with the exception of, I should say this is just all within the backdrop of and the context of what they've been through. For what they've been through, they're doing considerably well for the most part, for the majority of those that have been freed. Some of them have already been able to be just discharged and be with their families and in their homes in more familiar environments. But it is, or rather, I should backtrack a little bit, not in their homes, but more or less with family in other places.
And home is where your heart is at, as we all know, and their family members, of course. This is the home that they were waiting for. And we are seeing those images of those helicopters that are ready to go when given the order at the Sheba Medical Center. And Zach, you've been out in the field for the last several days, on all those days when hostages have been released. Walk us through those stages in the process now that the hostages are in the hands of the Red Cross. What is next, and how many stops in the way until they get to you, to home, to the family?
It is quite a few steps. It does involve, let's start from the beginning. When they're in the Red Cross's hands and they're in southern Gaza, they transit to the Rafah crossing, where they are presented to essentially the Egyptian authorities who are in control of the crossing. And then that's after they're through into Egypt, they're handed over to the Israelis and the IDF, who begin a very quick journey, rather, along a dirt road, essentially, that runs the length of the border fence between the Rafah crossing and the Kerem Shalom crossing. At that point, a determination will be made whether or not to extricate relocate them via helicopter from there or to continue that journey by van. And it's dependent on their condition, their health. There's already medical professionals that will be with them from the moment they're exchanged into Israeli hands, and they'll start that assessment right away. They'll know that if someone is in dire need of medical attention, and that helicopter can take them to hospitals potentially even closer to southern Israel. Beersheva's on standby. There are hospitals all along the flight path that are on standby, prepared in case anything happens. But here is the area where they have the specialists and a large medical team here in Tel Aviv. So they do want to eventually work their way up to this location so that they can stay overnight. There's no timetable for how long. The hospital is willing to keep them however long that may need to be. And it's those specialists that will finally get a chance to do more in-depth analysis, tests, blood work, the sorts of things that they won't get right away, but they will over the course of their hospital stay. And that's all precautionary for the most part, but it could be necessary. It really is all just dependent on how they're presented, what is their condition the moment that they arrive in Israeli hands.
So still some way to go, and yet compared to what they've been through in those past 54 days, just the fact that they're on Israeli soil shortly, we hope, in Israeli hands, is everything. Zach Anders at the Sheba Medical Center, thank you very much for this. Back here in studio with Owen Alterman at 24 News, a senior diplomatic correspondent, and Major General Eitan Dangot. Gentlemen, again, we are receiving those good news that we're one step ahead in this process, and yet Hamas citing logistical issues while discussing tomorrow and potentially another extension and potentially even a new deal. How can you negotiate with a partner that is so shady?
Look, I think there's a bigger issue, frankly, than the delays in the release of the hostages, and a bigger issue even than the violations of the ceasefire. And that's the issue of visits by the Red Cross, an idea that we first heard in this table in this studio from Eitan Dangot. The Israeli government has said, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, reading from what he said was the text of the agreement, that it is part of this agreement that the Red Cross will visit all of the hostages who are not being released. In my opinion, if this is part of the agreement, Hamas has said it's not, there are so many misunderstandings here. It almost, and I've said this before, almost leads someone to believe that not all the terms were firmed up. There wasn't a full meeting of the minds. There were some that were soft understandings, again, speculation. But if this is part of the agreement, this is a material clause of the agreement. This is an important part of the agreement. This is an important part of the agreement for reasons that are extremely obvious. It would enable Israel, presumably, to know which hostages are alive and which are no longer with us, a critically important piece of information for understanding what comes next. It would get medicine to people who desperately need it, potentially, right? We saw the condition of Elma Avraham in the medical care city. Thank God her condition is improving. And just imagine what it would mean for the morale of the hostages themselves to be visited by someone from the Red Cross.
We're learning more about the conditions.
And we're learning more about the physical and mental conditions
what you hear is the opposite side of what you expect. So one thing is clear. The Red Cross is one-way ticket, only serving those who have to move from Israel and not give anything to the people that belong to Israeli nation. It's not from now, it is for a longer period. I think in this activity, we are facing the real face of the Red Cross. This is not international organization. This is organization who's sponsored by the third world countries, by the rich countries that support and fulfill a mission for themselves and not for us. It's not equal organization. So don't have any more expectations from them, even though we have to demand what to do. Maybe I will surprise you.
But that's the thing. The issue is not the Red Cross. The address here is the Israeli government, which is not enforcing the agreement that it said it signed, and of which Hamas is in apparent material breach.
I might tell you that in the end, The demons are exist. I've been there in this circle. It's not even I'm not blame the Israeli government, because in this kind of forest, when you are looking about the road that will bring you from one side to the outside of this darkness of this forest, you have to do things that even you pay with. Okay, you reduce, but never leave your demons, because one day they will have to pay for what they did. I mean, for the Red Cross, according to the international community. So it's not a failure, it is a demand, but at the end, as Benny Gantz said, you are in a very a timetable that you can pay a price of losing the people, and this is the most important thing. Secondly, if you ask me about the technical problems today, I'm not surprising. In my opinion, even Eli, I can estimate that at the end of the 8th day, at the end of the 10th day, Hamas will fulfill most of the agreement. The question mark now, there is a symbol, the Bibas family. The baby, his brother, the parents that we are looking to see, and you just imagine a baby of 11 or 10 months that is now 2 months in most important time of his life to develop, to exist. I'm not know what's going there. Hamas is trying.
Perhaps because they became such a symbol, and their family members who are here in Israel talked about it earlier today, that perhaps because they became such a symbol, it is working to the opposite of their benefit in this respect, and Hamas is keeping them.
I hope, but at the end, I hope to see them in Israel.
Of course.
And this is the main question with whom we are dealing. Yeah. Secondly, in my opinion, there was also 2 areas when the 2 women were released and where the other delegation or the 10 that are releasing from Rafah. One thing, on Rafah, when you are coming, there is a new kind of thing that has been developed the last days. The demonstration by the Palestinian civilian who are running after the car, throwing stones of the hostages on the way to fight them. And on the way now, between Khan Yunis to Rafah Gate, something like 20 minutes.
Yes.
I hope it is passing safely as happened in the last days. And from Rafah to Kerem Shalom, entering to Israel,
yes,
it's something like 7 to 8 minutes. I know the way, I know the area. It's on the other side of the Egyptian side, and there will be a very clear decision whether to take them off by helicopters, yes, or to bring them to another. They will be in Israel, and I hope the health situation. I would like also to emphasize, we see every night the completely wonderful organization that start from heart and professionality in the hospitals with the Air Force. You don't see 1 meter that you can photograph people and damage their privacy. It's really something that we have to be proud on it.
No, the health sector, by all accounts, is really mobilized in an impressive way.
Absolutely, and to that point exactly, let's cross now live to I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseron at the Saad Junction in southern Israel, a route, one stop on the route that the hostages are set to go through. Ariel, what do we know? The latest update from a few minutes ago, that they have been transferred to the Red Cross. Do we know how close they are to move to get to the Rafah crossing?
Right, Ellie. So after hours of delay, and after which Hamas explained was due to technical difficulties, IDF issuing a statement 2 minutes ago confirming that according to its knowledge, the 10 hostages expected to be released today, 5 minors, 5 women, have been handed over to the Red Cross and are making their way to Israeli territory. Now, in terms of the timeline, we can compare this to the 2 women who were released earlier this evening. So we're talking about another hour and a half until they're expected to pass here in Urim Junction on their way to Chatzarim Air Base. From there, they will make their ways to hospitals in Israel, where they will be receiving a second medical evaluation after the one carried out at Hatzerim Air Base, but also, and importantly as well, they will finally be able to be reunited with their families.
Yes, and we also know that four foreign nationals have been released as well, again separately from the deal with Israel, but we are of course welcoming every person who is being released from the monstrous hands of Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip, and they too are of course receiving close medical and mental care here in Israel as soon as they're out. Ariel Osron, the Israeli War Cabinet is convening as we speak, discussing not just the potential extension of the hostage deal, of the ceasefire, but also what it would mean to go back to action on the ground.
Look, Ellie, I don't want to be suspenseful, but in 47 minutes, the ceasefire will have expired.
Right.
And Israel and Hamas are working in uncharted territory. There still isn't a deal to extend the ceasefire agreement, according to a Hamas official talking to Qatari media. Negotiations in Doha to extend this ceasefire are still ongoing, but we're approaching the midnight hour and into uncharted territory. And unfortunately, from previous experience, a lot of things can go wrong in that time. And so I know the IDF says it's on high alert. Also, the command for attacking, if necessary, beginning tomorrow, have been approved. There's above our heads, we hear the buzz of Israeli jets and choppers all the evening, and so the IDF is indeed showing that it is prepared to re-engage tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow, if necessary. But to the best of our knowledge, negotiations in Qatar continue to extend this ceasefire potentially another day or two. We'll just,
yes.
The clock is ticking for tonight.
The clock is ticking, and yet, as our Owen Alterman suggested earlier, there is a question here and perhaps a maneuverability range here, whether it's midnight or 7 a.m. that the deal expires. So perhaps some more time to pursue more hostage release in the coming days. Ariel Osron, I-24 News, Senior Middle East Correspondent, thank you very much for this. And we want to turn now to Dr. Didi Maimon Khan, clinical psychologist and trauma specialist in humanitarian aid and intervention, and founder and CEO of Kuchinit, and also an international specialist, professional advisor for Israel, the international aid organization. Thank you very much, Dr. Maimon Khan, for joining us. Earlier on the program, we were talking to an aunt of two girls who have been released earlier this week from captivity, Dafnan El Al-Kayam. And when we asked her, how the family is coping with the situation, what are they doing in order to try and get them to talk, or rather to help them vent, or rather let them be and speak at their own time, she said, well, there are professionals to do that. We're a family. We're their family, and our role is to surround them with love, to give them a hug, and to reassure them. And I have to say, Dr. Maimon Khan, it makes so much sense.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Social support is absolutely essential and is one of the protective factors against developing a more severe form of trauma later on. It's extremely important, of course. Having said that as well, that many of the hostages, when they come back, they are completely overwhelmed with all kinds of stimulation, such as light, sound, and human touch. And some people who may have craved that human touch very much might find themselves, ironically, needing to avoid human touch and go into themselves and isolate themselves. But every case unto itself, and every person is completely different.
Yes, and Dr. Maimin Khan, where it was just cleared for publications, the list of those who are on their way here back home from the Gaza Strip to Israel. So if you stay with us, and I will just read out the names of, again, 10 more Israelis making their way back home. 13-year-old Gali Troshensky, 16-year-old Amit Shani, 17-year-old Ophir Angol, 18-year-old Liam O, 18-year-old Itai Regev, whose sister was released earlier, Yarden Roman, 36-year-old, Moran Stella Yanai, 40-year-old, 49-year-old Liat Atzili, and Araya Rotem, 54-year-old. She's the mother of Hila Rotem, who was released earlier as well without her mother. Last but definitely not least, 57-year-old Raz Ben Ami. And this list is, of course, joining Irina Tati, 73-year-old Irina Tati, and 50-year-old Yelena Topanov were released earlier tonight. So all of them are on their way back home, currently in the hands of the Red Cross, a route to Israel, and we will keep you posted on that, of course. Back with Dr. Maimin Khan. Well, obviously there are different cases, as you've illustrated, different needs, and hence a different modus operandi with adults, with children, and perhaps one of the most chilling stories that we've heard, and we've opened our program with it, is that the kids who were released are all whispering. And this brings me to ask, is the work with them about forgetting the fear or learning to live with it?
Well, the work with traumatized people is helping them to cope with the fear. If we're talking about the symptom of fear, it's one of the many symptoms that you can have. And luckily, there are many evidence-based interventions that can help traumatized people overcome or learn to deal with the fear that they have. This can take a very long time, and a lot of patience is needed, but it is possible.
Yes, and you know, as we are waiting for 10 more hostages to get back home, I assume that there is this initial adrenaline rush, coming back, seeing everyone, getting this warmer than warm embrace, of course, and then at some point, reality hits to an extent for the hostages, for their families. How will the coming weeks, coming months going to look like?
Well, first of all, luckily, we have no precedents in the literature for hostages who are children. And the way that the children and adults are going to cope in the months and years to come is going to very much depend on a large variety of factors. Many of them, before they were taken hostage, might have witnessed or experienced real hell, such as death of family members in front of them, or seeing family members taken off separately as hostages. Some will not have seen that, will have come back, and will, with all of the elation and delight, will all of a sudden have learned about the what has been going on since they were gone. Perhaps the death of a family member, like we've seen many times, knowing that loved ones are still hostages, as well as not coming home.
Right.
Most people have lost their homes. It's trauma upon trauma, in the fact that the trauma is not over. We are still in a state of national mourning, national trauma, with many, many unknowns.
Right, and in this respect, before we let you go, Dr. Maimin Khan, you know, in the world of rehab or detox, there are, you know, certain time frames or milestones you're powering through and moving on to the next stage. X days for the body to cleanse, X days to fortify new habits, etc. Is it the same when it comes to the process of dealing with trauma?
Well, to an extent, initially, there will be the initial shock reactions, and there will be the first few weeks of watching and waiting what happens. But generally speaking, it is not linear. Each person, according to their own pace, and everyone needs much patience, love, and care to get back into their lives, to gain control, and to get back into the land of the to get back into living their lives. And this will be a different process for everyone. There's no clear rules. Some people will experience symptoms very early on. Some people will be okay, but might experience them later. And some people, majority of people, the literature has shown, and we know and we hope, will be okay. They will experience distress in the beginning for a long time, but with time they will be able to have an innate ability to heal from their trauma with psychological care and with social structures in place that help them to achieve this.
And we'll hang on to this, to the optimism that is so very necessary nowadays. Dr. Didi Maimin Khan, professional advisor for Israel, the International Aid Organization, of course, a clinical psychologist and trauma specialist in humanitarian aid and intervention. Thank you very, very much for speaking with us. Back here in studio with Owen Alterman, Major General Eitan Dangot. Reports in Egypt that the security personnel there is ready to welcome the 10 Israeli hostages and 4 Thai hostages from the Red Cross. It seems that we're once again back on the right track.
Yes, and I'm saying again, nobody make you anything of surprise.
Yeah.
We have to be ready all the time of this kind of Hamas, we're making this kind of waiting or changing, and they claim it's technique. But at the end, I know, listen, we are talking about the war continuing. Hamas has a loss of price, and we have to understand it. Hamas is in a bad shift. With all its around that Israel didn't complete the mission, yes, we are already at the beginning of our maneuvering. But Hamas understands from the kind of the maneuvering that this time Israel is really going to be direct with its goal, and they estimate if it continues, before it was stopping, we would be in a different situation. They need the time. They need to stop because for them is linear, yes or no for their future. So I believe that in this kind of circumstances, what is the continuating? We can estimate that will be here the 9th and the 10 days. I think so, after the 7th and the 8th, and then will come the main important thing of decision for the Israeli war cabinet. It will be very difficult with heavy weight. And another point, we didn't raise it here now, what will be in the north as in the south, what will be the condition under such kind of agreement to move back Hezbollah from the fence, northern to the Litani. And another thing, pay attention, the West Bank is bubbling, and we are working 24 hours there in order to prevent terror activities until now with a lot of success, but there is but. What will be the Israeli policy to the Palestinian authorities, not to Mahmoud Abbas, which is failed in his mission under his statement, and what will be the situation there? It also has a great meaning.
Owen, a closing sentence.
This is an agreement that Hamas has largely wanted to keep. That's a sentence, basically, I think what Eitan was trying to say, and that Israel has wanted to keep for its own reasons as well. I agree. I think we're headed toward an extension. By the way, my reading, at least, of the government decision is that after Saturday, you have to actually come back to that full set of 30-plus government ministers. There may be another way of reading it where you can get a few more days, but once we get to that point, that really is decision time for the war cabinet. Again, that junction we were talking about, and deciding which way to go.
No agreement yet, so tomorrow it's another crucial day indeed. And as 10 more Israeli hostages and 4 Thai hostages are making their way back to Israel as we speak, we want to leave you with the images that will make you tear, but the good kind. We promise more and more families reuniting as their loved ones are coming back from Hamas.